Nowadays, it is pretty common for both parents to have to work at least part or, full time. And when you are away from the home for so long each day, that can have a pretty big impact on your family life. You have to come home and you have to still do the chores, you have to still take care of the kids, and you still have to take care of yourself as well. And this balancing act can be pretty tricky to do sometimes, and it can be pretty stressful as well. But typically, we see that women have to do this balancing act to a much greater degree than men. Typically, women are expected to return to work pretty much right after giving birth due to financial reasons and just the very legitimate concern that being away from work, even for a short period of time, could negatively affect their career path. So, what I'm talking about here is just the fact that unfortunately our government, unlike some other countries, does not offer any real kind of leave for maternity or paternity for that matter. And as a result, US women often are punished for taking even short leaves after childbirth. But if you didn't know this, in pretty much every country that's similar to ours in some way, they are given some kind of leave, and that leave is usually paid. So it's like a governmentally mandated thing that women should stay home with their new baby for a certain period of time. Just to mention a few examples. In Germany and Norway and Sweden, women get 9 months of paid leave following childbirth. Just think about that. Imagine you are a German mother, a first-time mother, and you get to spend almost a whole year just bonding with your newborn. That sounds wonderful. And with all the stuff we talked about in this class, that's ideal. You need to be there with your newborn. It's very important formative time for that newborn. But then in our country, we have 0 days given. Some employers might actually give you some time off, but I'm sure it's not going to be 9 months. You only get that kind of thing when the government steps in and we have regulations for this kind of stuff. So doing this juggling act, taking care of babies while still having to work full time, it can really take a toll on an individual. And this care for dependents will have a pretty profound negative impact on the individual's stress levels, career opportunities and promotions, and just coping abilities in general. Because if you think about it, if you're spending a lot of time dealing with a infant or a young child's issues, you're not dealing with your own. And failure to manage your own health and mental well-being could blow up in your face later on. It's very important that you have healthy coping abilities. Now, women, as I mentioned, they do tend to have to deal with this stuff to a greater extent. And as a result, they typically experience greater problems. These problems can be reduced by having a good partner that, tries to contribute at least equitably, or just having a nice family support system so you have other people that can help take care of the kids and clean the house and things like that. Another way to reduce the negative consequences of dependent care is by just giving the woman more control over her job, letting her set her own schedule, clock in and clock out when she wants to. So having a more flexible work schedule is just great in general for dealing with these kinds of issues. And this increase that I'm talking about in, both parents working, having these dual earner families, has led to a increased demand for backup care. That's that kind of emergency care for these dependent children that parents will seek when, their child is sick or for some reason can't go to daycare. So parents obviously don't want to have to give up a day of work just because their kid has the sniffles and can't go to daycare, so they have to have some kind of backup. And that backup is usually like grandma or, you know, the cousins or something like that. Just you need to have something in place. You need to make sure what your plans are. And it's probably a good idea to have a backup for your backup because anything can happen. So, with regard to having to come home and after a long day of work and do all this household chores and things like that, typically we find that women are going to be the most satisfied with this division of labor when men spend a lot of time around the house just doing things that they can do well. You know, you don't have to have equality. You shouldn't expect the two partners to do the exact same things at 50%. It's all about equity. You know, you want to contribute what your skill set can contribute best so that it's balanced. But one thing in particular that men can do that greatly supports the woman, greatly increases satisfaction for women, is when men are willing to perform those traditionally female chores. You know, like wiping poopy butts and cooking lunches and things like that. You know, men who can do that kind of stuff usually get a lot of gratification from their spouse. When we look at this kind of division of labor cross-culturally, you know, look at different ethnic differences, we do see some interesting patterns. Like European Americans, Caucasians, what we typically see is that the men seem to be kind of lazy. You know, they don't really help out as much as men from other ethnic groups, especially like Latino or African groups. In dual earner couples, African American women tend to do a lot of work. And the work that they do tends to result in them feeling really kind of overburdened and dissatisfied in their lives. Mexican American men, you know, men born in Mexico and then immigrated, we tend to see them help out a lot around the household, especially if their wives earn more money. And then when we look at like various Native American groups, we see like Navajo women, for example. If they don't live on that reservation, if they don't live on a reservation, then they tend to have a more traditional kind of, you know, lifestyle where they're doing the majority of those household chores. But whether you find yourself doing out a lot of chores around the home or whether you're spending more time at work, you are going to experience some degree of work-family conflict. No matter what your lifestyle is, if you have a job and you have a family, there's going to be a conflict there. So this refers to this feeling of being pulled in multiple directions by often incompatible demands from one's job and one's family. And you see the highest stress level and work-family conflict when there are young children in the home, you know, like at least 2 preschool children in the home. And something I already mentioned is that women really do appreciate when men are willing to do the more traditional, like female chores. And conversely, women tend to be pretty annoyed. They get the most bothered when husbands are unwilling to do this woman's work, so to speak. But something I've already described in a few ways in previous videos is that when you do get a job and you are spending a lot of time on those work demands, you don't have much time for other things, including your spouse. You know, your relationship with your spouse is going to suffer due to these other demands. And it's not just demands from work, it's also demands from family and chores and things like that. But dual earner couples tend to have the hardest time, you know, just maintaining a good relationship. But above all else, when it comes to this kind of balancing, you also need to keep yourself in mind. It's very important that you try to engage in some leisure as well. Leisure just refers to discretionary activity that includes simple relaxation, activities for enjoyment, or creative pursuits. Now, an individual's choice of leisure depends on a couple of things. How good you think you are at that particular activity, so your perceived competence, and your psychological comfort, which refers to basically how much time do you think you have? How much energy do you think you have that you can spend on this activity? Are you meeting the demands of your job? Like if you're not worried about your job, then you'll have more time and energy to spend on leisure. So these two factors can determine what kind of leisure will be attractive to you. And there's a lot of different kinds of leisure activities out there. Some people prefer physical stuff, like training their body, going to the gym, playing sports, and things like that. Other people prefer crafting, like building machines or woodworking or, stitching or whatever. Other people, like myself, include we tend to be interested in things like video games and board games and just gaming in general. Just engaging in social games and personal, like solo games and so on. Other people enjoy just watching TV. They like to watch movies with friends and TV shows and so on. Some people prefer to spend time with their friends, just quiet, social, private time. Maybe just talking and having a drink, maybe eating dinner together, that kind of stuff. But other people, they prefer to go out and meet new people. This is what we call social public time. Just spending time with strangers, making new friends. For some people, their religion is very important to them, so they spend their leisure time in religious pursuits, engaged in various kinds of ceremonies and rituals and whatnot. If you have a particularly high degree of comfort, psychological comfort, and you have time to travel, that is a source of great pleasure for some individuals. So travel, domestic travel, foreign travel, this is something that a lot of people just really enjoy. And then for other individuals, they're more of a homebody kind of a person. They don't really want to get out much. They're more so what we would call experiential. Like that's what their leisure interests are. So this would refer to things like gardening or collecting and organizing, that kind of stuff. I do a bit of this kind of experiential stuff as well. If you haven't noticed, I've got a lot of action figures. And then there's people who spend their leisure time developing their skills and knowledge. These are the kinds of individuals that in their free time they take some courses at a local community college perhaps because they never learned how to speak a particular language and they'd really like to learn how. Maybe they could travel to that country someday. And then for other individuals, they prefer leisure activities that focus more so on tech stuff. Like these are the kinds of people who like to build systems and break things down and try to optimize the performance of, their computer or whatever. So there's plenty of different options out there. I'm sure you know which ones are interesting to you, but your interests can change depending on what skills you acquire and depending on how much comfort you have with your job. And another big factor that affects, your interest in these activities is just how much energy you have. As people get older, they tend to kind of slow down a bit. Their choice in leisure activities becomes less, edgy. They're more interested in just spending time at home with family. Whereas younger adults typically are willing to try a much wider range of things, which can often be kind of intense, like some extreme sports perhaps. But it is important to be engaged. No matter what those leisure activities are, it's important to be engaged in leisure because more engagement has been linked to less dementia and depression later in life. And people who are engaged in leisure activities, we also just see an overall improvement in their well-being. It's a great way to deal with stress. As I mentioned in a previous video, all jobs produce stress. So one of the primary ways to combat that stress is just by leisure, hanging out, relaxing, spending time with friends, spending time with your action figure collection or playing video games or whatever it is you like to do. So there's 4 specific ways that engagement in leisure activities can improve your mental health. They serve as a distraction. from negative life events, like if you had a bad day at work. They help to generate optimism about the future. Like myself personally, when my job is really starting to get me down and I'm starting to think, you know, get those kind of depressing thoughts, it definitely cheers me up to think about, new games that might be coming out or new movies that are coming out and things that I could do with my family in the future. So produces a lot of optimistic thoughts like that. Uh, Another way, the third way that engagement in leisure can improve your mental health is that it helps you to feel like you have a connection to your past. It helps to feel like you have a sense of continuity in your life. Like I still have my original NES and Super NES, and I play those games, and it helps me remember what it was like to be a child, and I feel that same kind of childhood, nostalgia, whatever. It's definitely a good thing to have that connection. But they can also be the fourth way that leisure activities can improve your mental health is that they can actually be a vehicle for your personal transformation. And what I just mean by that is you can learn things. You can expand your horizons, so to speak, by trying new things in the pursuit of leisure. So these are all really great things that leisure can do, and it is important to be involved in leisure, but you don't want to take it too far. Some people, they get so focused on leisure that they kind of miss the whole point. Leisure is supposed to be a break time. It's a time for you to recharge so that you can get back to work. But if pursued to too much of an extent, if pursued to the extreme, leisure activity can actually create more conflicts than it helps to solve. Like if, for example, you're so focused on your modeling, your model collection, maybe you like to build models or something. If you're so focused on that you start to just spend entire days or entire weekends, or you stay up till like 4 in the morning just building these models, and your whole family doesn't really know what you're doing, and they haven't seen you in days. Like, you can see how that could be a problem if you get so focused on your leisure that other aspects of your life suffer. So it's very important when engaged in leisure to just think of it like a break time. This is an important aspect of your life, definitely, but this isn't all your life is. This is just a short break.